After watching part 1 of this build, you may have been thinking how this is any different than those kit builds that I decided against. I'm working from a schematic, which may seem to be a pretty simple plug-and-play kind of scenario, and I'm simply ordering all the parts I need, which is essentially the same thing as receiving them in a single kit. However, given that most of the main components are coming from a completely different piece of equipment with a different rectification circuit and potentially different voltage and current requirements, I may need to adjust the schematic to fit the components I'm using. And for that reason, I purchased a kit with every value resistor and capacitor I could ever need. This 5C2 amp was designed to have a specific power transformer installed with a specific turns ratio, and therefore a specific secondary output voltage, which would then be filtered to achieve the B+ voltage, or the high DC voltage going to the tubes. This power transformer from the radio may or may not have the same secondary voltage, and therefore may require me to change the filtering and voltage drop resistors in order to get the appropriate voltage for the design. I couldn't find a reliable answer to what specs the original power transformer had, but I know this one powered these tubes just fine, so I know it's possible. It's just a matter of how much extra work it's going to take. Now, for this cathode biasing circuit, I'm confident that this 500 ohm resistor will work, but I may want to put an adjustable resistor in there to be able to easily tune the biasing. For now, I'm going to leave this in here just to get the amp working. Quick note, I don't need this 5 watter. I could have done just fine with a 1 watt resistor, but this is all I had before those kits arrived, and I already soldered this one in place. I'm probably just going to leave it in there until I get that variable resistor in there. The build went surprisingly smooth. I hooked up the power transformer to the circuit and was pleased when I measured a B+ voltage of about 370 volts DC and a plate voltage at the 6v6 of about 250 volts DC. I checked to make sure I was getting the proper voltages at certain other locations, but let's take this a step further and verify that we're within the maximum voltage and current ratings of the output tube in Class A operation. Just a warning, this is going to get a little techie for a minute. First, the plate voltage on the 6v6, as I just mentioned, was measured at 250 volts. This is below the listed 315 volt maximum on the datasheet, so we're good here. Next, let's calculate the cathode current by measuring the exact resistance of the cathode bias resistor and the voltage across it. This nominal 500 ohm resistor is 497 ohms, and there is 9.07 volts across it. This means that the current is 9.07 divided by 497, which equals 18.25 milliamps. This is well within the listed 35 milliamp maximum, so we're also good here. Since we're on a roll, let's use these numbers to estimate the power dissipation. The more accurate way to calculate this would be to directly measure the screen current, but we can use our calculated value of 18.25 milliamps to get close enough. We can calculate the power to be our 250 volts at the plate minus the cathode voltage, then multiplied by the cathode current, which gives us about 4.4 watts. This calculated value is going to be slightly higher than reality because we didn't take the screen current into consideration, but it's a good estimate. Using the calculator on Rob Robinette's site, I learned that I can take approximately a 5.5% discount off the cathode current in order to more accurately estimate the plate current. So, assuming a new plate current of 17.2 milliamps gives us 4.1 watts, which I'm sure this is closer to the truth than my previous calculation. Just like Mopar did back in the day, I like to undermarket and over-deliver, so I'll call her a 4 watt amp. Another cool feature of this online calculator is the efficiency rating. Right now it's running at approximately 37% efficiency, which is simply the 4 watts that we're getting out of the maximum 12 watt potential a 6v6 output tube can produce. You might think it's pretty bad, but what this calculator doesn't take into account is all the other uses I'm getting out of all this heat dissipation. Now that we're confident that this amp is operating properly, the rest of the build can be consolidated into a couple lessons learned. I think the biggest lesson I learned is how important it is to get your information from a reliable source. This may surprise you, but we can't believe everything we read online, even if we're reading it on a robust and publicly well-known platform. If you can, I recommend finding a mentor who can help you navigate the often contradicting and unreliable information floating out there. If you ask questions in a small or dedicated group of people, such as a private Facebook group about tube amp building, I believe you have a better chance of getting reliable information than just surfing the open web. I'm lucky to have a friend who does this professionally that I can ask questions to and run ideas by in order to make sure I'm on the right track. He's been instrumental through this build, and I'll be sure to give him a huge thank you. The second lesson I learned is about order of operations. One example of this is I found it easier to work from back to front, or from the closed face of the chassis to the open face. Mistakenly, most of my work was done the complete opposite way. Normally, the turret board is secured a lot closer to the closed face of the chassis, which puts the controls in a plane closer to the open side. Also, a lot of the time, the tube sockets are mounted on an adjacent face, allowing more exposure to the leads of the turret board. Since I mounted the tube sockets on the closed face, I was forced to suspend the board closer to the open face, allowing room for the tube socket leads to accept the wiring. When wiring everything up, I should have first secured the wires to the leads below the turret board. Instead, I secured the wires to the board first, and then had to finagle my hot soldering iron to all the below nooks and crannies where these tube sockets and controls are. Just made the whole experience less enjoyable. I know everyone says this, but I need to highlight the importance of checking your wiring against your schematic with the highest level of detail. I recommend making all of your mechanical connections first, then get a good night's sleep and come back and go through it with a fine-tooth comb before soldering everything in place. Even after checking everything twice and highlighting my progress, the volume and tone knobs were not working properly, and it took me a while to realize that I simply placed the wire on the wrong side of a capacitor. After fixing that, everything worked great, but it just took a lot of unnecessary time. I'm really happy with the noise level, especially with all the design compromises I made and my inexperience. An acceptable noise level is subjective. What I deem as acceptable may not be for many of you. But even with the volume and tone knobs cranked all the way up, the level of noise is almost completely drowned out once I start playing. If I dial down the tone knob to say 6 or 7, the noise is virtually gone even with the volume still cranked. I don't have numbers, or really even knobs for that matter, just the shaft, but I think you get the point. There is significant crackling when I tap both the 6SC7 preamp and the 6v6 output tubes. This only happens when I tap on the tube itself, not the socket from either the top or the bottom, so I hope new tubes will fix the problem. I think this is going to be my main practice amp for a long time. I'm really pleased with how everything turned out, and I love the breakup tones. My other amps really shine in the distortion category, and their clean tones don't really resonate with me. This, on the other hand, is my first amp to give me that classic and inspirational American tone that can't be replicated anywhere else. If you want to know more about this amp build, please drop a comment below. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button and consider subscribing to follow this and other projects in my home studio. Thanks for watching.